Good evening. This is Isaac, Programmable Audio, or Mix with a Newb, Episode 4. That's right, we're on Episode 4. Alright, tonight the topic I want to cover, sort of the general mix topic, is rough mix, because I talked about it in Episode 1, and I feel like I kind of passed over it quickly, and I know as a beginner, when I was recording and starting to learn how to mix, I didn't really see many videos that would just say, like, how do you do a rough mix? There'd be mixers and producers out there putting videos out, and they'd just say, yeah, do your rough mix, and when you get the rough mix from the tracking room, it looks like this. And I'm going, hey, you want to talk about a rough mix for a minute? Tell me how to do that. What a rough mix means basically is you have all your tracks and you just kind of, in a quick way, without a whole lot of precision, you bring the levels together to please your ear, without using a whole lot of things like we used in Episode 3, Part 1 and 2, like audio statistics, without really getting too deep into the weeds with, plugins and stuff. Although we will use a plugin tonight. The plugin of the night is compression, which compression is such an important part of making recordings sound good. It's not really possible for me to cover compression as well as I should be able to. And honestly, I'll be honest with you now, I'm such a beginner that I don't really fully understand it. As far as I understand technically what it does, and I'll just take a minute to explain. A compressor is a plugin. Let's open one. So tonight for the rough mix, I'm gonna just look at drums only. We'll just keep it simple that way. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw a compressor on the main drum bus. So again, to get that, I just type in REAC, and Recomp is the first. Recomp is Reaper's built-in compressor. Super simple, powerful, good tool. Over here we have our threshold. Threshold is the point at which the compressor engages. The compressor kicks in and does what it needs to do. The ratio. These are probably the two most important things here. The ratio tells the compressor how much to squash the sound, how many decibels to push down. So if you're telling it 1 to 2, for every 2 decibels over, you're going to squash it by 1. For every 4 decibels, if you move this to 4, every 4 decibels that it goes over the threshold, first setting we had, squash the sound by 4. Or by 1. Okay. So a 4 decibel increase would squash down to 1. So set these back to 0. What I'm going to show you now, this is a really useful thing that Reaper has, and especially for us noobs, myself, people watching, Reaper has a bunch of these stock settings. These are great. I use these a lot. What I do with these, I'm going to give you a word of caution. Look at the stock settings, grab one, and then tune it to your ear. Don't stick with the stock settings, and that's advice I've heard elsewhere. I can't credit exactly who said it, but several people have said, look at the stock settings in your software, apply something that logically makes sense, and then use your ear and your eyes to fix it, to tweak it. Okay? So that's my advice. I'm not telling you use Reaper's stock settings because it's too easy and it may not really do what you want it to do. If in your mind you're thinking, oh, I've been looking for a compressor with default settings so I can just throw something on there, and someone else thought of this, so it's going to be good enough. Not always. Not necessarily. You want to use your ear. So we got our compressor going. I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we're going to listen to what we have here. The only thing that I've done, again, I dragged the drum bus down, and I actually put it at -10. -10 for some headroom, and our kick is at this -2 decibel. The kick bus is set there, and this is to achieve that that -4 peak that we talked about in episode 3, parts 1 and 2. Okay, so I do have some volume adjustments to my main drum bus and my kick bus. The rest of this these are all zeroed out, and I've taken the time to go ahead and zero them left and right as far as panning, because in the rough mix I did pan some stuff out, which gives you room in your image. When you're listening to a drum set, you have things on the left and right. So by using panning, you can send elements of the drum kit, like the snare or the hi-hats. You can send the snare left or right. You don't typically want to go really far, but you can put the hi-hats like pretty drastically to one side. You can put the floor tom to the other side, and it gives you this image. They call it a stereo image of the drum kit. And a weird thing to think of it in terms of image, because it's sound, but if you can imagine yourself standing in front of a drum kit, then as the pieces of the drum kit hit you, there is a difference between what you're hearing in both ears, and that's what kind of gives you that feeling that you're actually in front of a live kit. So that's something you can bring to a recording, and all recordings have it. For the most part, I'm sure there's some mono recordings out there. Mono would mean that the same thing's coming out of both speakers. There's no field of depth. There's no difference between the sides. So anyway, I'm the tangent master. I'm telling you guys. I feel like I want to explain something, and I just go down this rabbit hole, and half of you probably are watching and going, yeah, we know what panning is, we know what stereo is. Anyway, that's what this row of knobs is here. So I've sort of zeroed everything out. Just as a reminder, on my kick bus I do have a gate. I covered that in episode 2. And now we have compression on the drum bus. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to pick... There's this vintage overheads, and there's attack overheads. Let's try the two of them separately. First, let's disable the compression. So that's what it sounds like without it, and let's listen to it with it. It might be kind of hard to tell what it's even doing, okay? It's just sort of smoothing out the overall sound. It's just making those harder hits a little softer. It's just there to even things out. Now, using some of these different settings, like you saw me start to drag this dry mix up, now you can actually, I believe with this here, this is supposed to be parallel compression, which is something you'll read about and hear about. And as far as my research tells me, parallel compression is built in by letting you tweak this dry and wet mix. And the reason I say that is that the goal of parallel compression is to have a single track feeding another track with a compressor on it that's triggered by the original track. So you have like the dry sound, and then you mix in that compressed signal. So right here we have the wet. Wet means, I'm not going to go on a tangent, but wet means the affected sound, the sound that's actually being compressed, and the dry signal means, the drum tracks without any effects on it, just clean by itself, dry they call it. Okay, so dry all the way down, creep the signal up, and you can kind of hear the peak start to come back into it. If we turn the wet all the way down, the dry just sounds like exactly what you'd normally hear. Creep that press signal. So it may be very, very hard for your ears to tell what any of that did. It was for me in the beginning. It's just a way to kind of... It's like you start with like a dirt road and it's all, wavy and rocky and craggy, and then you come through with like a heavy machine, like a grader, and you knock that road down to like flat. When you look at the road, it's not a perfectly flat, it's not like a slab of concrete, but it is now like an even So that's kind of how I think of compression, is like just kind of like lowering everything to a more pleasing, even level. So let's try, we'll go from vintage overheads, we're going to try these attack overheads, and we'll see. Alright, so right away, what my ear can hear, and I imagine what your ear can hear, is that there's a lot of cymbal in this mix. And that's because I have this ambient bus here, and I called it ambient because I have room mics and hi-hat and tom mics. The room mic is a condenser mic that sits about 7 feet back from the kit, which is, it's supposed to give like an ideal, it's supposed to capture like what the room makes the drum sound like. It doesn't really do that. I mean, I'm not skilled enough yet to really do that. It's just pointed at the kit. It's extra noise in there that you can mess with. So let's solo room 1 and room 2. So this is like, it hears everything. It's hearing some kick. The kick is real weak. It's hearing snare. It's got a ton of cymbal. So this might be the culprit for our extra cymbal. All right, let's listen to the hi-hats and toms. This is a combination of about 5 different mics, which is a limitation of our recording equipment. You want usually individual mics, but in this case it's 1 sitting over the hi-hat, it's 2 sitting over the rack toms, there's 1 under the floor tom, and then there's a small pencil mic above the ride cymbal. So let's listen to this one by itself. You can tell it's a little bit different, it's they're a little bit different. Now, with these two, if you just immediately put the room mic far right and said that this is sort of my hi-hat sound, and you put the hi-hats and tom sound completely left and said this is more my cymbal sound, you did some EQ and stuff, you would get this sort of like exaggerated image of the drums. That's kind of what we're going to do. So that's a little bit of a preview of our rough mix. The first thing, okay, so I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself explaining this. So what I want to do now, I'm actually going to turn this ambient bass all the way to negative infinity, and we're going to listen to the drum mix without those extra mics at all, and you'll see that it's sort of limited. Okay, we do have some cymbal bleed in there, right? We got a ton of kick, a ton of snare. And you might say, hey, that's actually not bad. But those cymbals are really, really weak. And hearing a mix without enough cymbals is really, your ear doesn't like it. It's especially when you're talking about rock and roll music like this, where the voice of the kit is so fundamental to the sound. We're a trio, so there's only 3 instruments. Count the vocals as a 4th one, maybe. So you have like 4 elements that you're hearing when you hear the rock band. If you remove cymbals from it, you're kind of taking like half of the drums away almost. So you may think, oh, that sounded awesome, just turning the ambient bus all the way down. But it doesn't quite work like that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to play again, and I'm going to creep this volume up to where, to my ear, it's a pleasing sound. The recording, I'm not sure how the recording is going to sound. It may be a little harsh or jarring. It may sound like the mix is off, but I'm just going based on what I can hear in the headphone. So let's creep it up. Let's get it to about negative 30, which is roughly the edge of what you can hear. I'm not hearing anything yet, so let's go to negative 20. All right, so now I'm starting to hear it fill in. It's in there now. All right, so there. Let's leave it at negative 20. No, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mute it. Unmuted. Muted. Unmuted. So it just kind of like fills it out, right? It kind of, that's exactly what it does. It fills it out. So we don't want to get rid of this ambient bus. We want to leave those mics in there. We captured them. they're great. One thing we might want to check out is the room mic is supposed to be delayed, and I've tried using effects with it, but I'm not that good at delay yet. So what I've actually done is I've actually physically moved these pieces of audio back. These are grouped. We'll talk about grouping another time. So what I was told was you want to make sure these line up, you want a millisecond of delay, 1 millisecond per foot of distance from the microphone to the center of the drum kit. Like they use the term nexus. Where if you put the drum kit in a bubble, where the exact center of that sphere would be, or roughly like where the kick and snare, kind of like right in that general area. You don't want to measure from like behind the drummer or from the very front of the drums. Just measure like right, basically kind of like where the snare, the front edge of the snare, somewhere right in there. And I did measure, and it was 7 feet, so it's 7 milliseconds. So we're going to shift these back using Nudge. Here's another tool that Reaper uses. So it's not a plugin. It's another tool I can just pop in there in the utility for my tutorial. So you hit N for Nudge. It pops up. Here you have Nudge, or you can do Set. You can do Position, or you can do... You have all these choices to how you're gonna move it. Left trim, left edge, etc. It's very simple to just nudge something however many milliseconds you want. You can go 1 millisecond at a time as you're listening. And I know I want 7 milliseconds, and I know I want it. So if you think about the way we recorded, all the drum mics that are sitting against the snare and against the kick and right close into the mic, they get the audio signal first. So that those sound waves are hitting those mics first. And then all the sound waves travel out 7 feet and hit that condenser mic. So the condenser mic is 7 milliseconds behind the rest of the recording. So to make it sound good, you want to move it head, right? This is a little tricky concept to think of. So we're actually moving this stuff all left. So we're going to nudge just left by 7 milliseconds. And we'll give it a listen again. This may not make any difference at all, but if you go in and look at these waves, this actually will help things line up a lot better down to the sample. I guess that's exaggerated. If you want to look at like the transients here, there's a nice hit. Okay, there's that would be the transient. Scroll up here. Or there they are. Okay, so just by moving it left, we've helped align it with the rest of the kit. And see, it's still a little bit off, and you could actually do this manually. I could go and change that nudge, hit N again. I could change this to 1 millisecond and have those bounce around. In fact, let's do that. So maybe it isn't quite 1 millisecond. See how the very beginning of the sound wave is just a little bit off? So I'm going to nudge this right by 1 millisecond. So it's a little bit closer. The problem with doing it like this is if I align it to one wave, if you go and take a look at another wave, and I just realized that this is getting a little outside of rough mix. But if you know how to do this and you're in the tracking room and you know, hey, I gotta adjust that room mic so it lines up with everything, you could do this in a matter of seconds. It doesn't take that long. Or if you learn how to use a delay plugin better than I could, I tried to add just a 7 millisecond delay, and it just didn't. The sound was all over the place. So I gave up on that. And that's something I need to teach myself. Maybe I'll create a tutorial on it then. All right. So like I was saying, if you use that method I just did to line up one hit, and you go and check somewhere else in the mix, it's not going to line up perfectly. So that's why I'm going to undo. There it goes. Let's actually undo all the way to when I moved it by 7 milliseconds. Okay, there it is. So now it's back. And I can tell because it's not highlighted. These are not highlighted anymore. That's a quick tip for you too. Right click, and you can drag a little lasso like that and highlight multiple things. So, and I think what I saw maybe was going on is that a lot of these items were grouped, which we can talk about grouping another time, but I think what I ended up doing was moving grouped items. So I actually moved. So I'm really glad that I undid all of that because I think I just moved everything back. So if we listened to that, you wouldn't have heard it. It would have, again, another noob mistake of mine. Hey, I'm going to move just these items back, but no, you've got groups, so you moved everything. All right. So there, nudge left by 7 milliseconds. Let's look at the timing. Just at a glance, that looks pretty good, right? Let's listen to it. While we're listening to it, I'm going to nudge it back to the right 7 milliseconds. I'm going to boost the ambient bus back to full while we do this. So here, actually I got to do that to both room and... Another new mistake here. The more I do this, the more I realize, man, I am terrible. It's good to be able to look at yourself critically and go, wow, I need a lot of work. The problem with what I was doing there was I was only moving one set of room. I need to move these as well. And these are still grouped. Alright, so now I'm doing multi-select, which is I did my lasso for these items. I held down shift and I lassoed these. So now I have room 1 and room 2 selected. While we're listening, let's do that nudge thing again. Okay? Left. So that should be closer to time aligned. 7 milliseconds. That's back to neutral or as recorded. Your ear can barely hear it. It's not even... It's almost not even worth bothering with, but if you want to be very precise, you want to do that. Okay? In some of the recordings I recall, it really made a huge difference. Some of the drum sound was not lining up correctly, especially early on. Once I learned this type of thing, it was easier to nail down. All right, so again, the goal was to work on a rough mix. The only thing to me, it sounds pretty close. It sounds pleasing to my ear. And I guess the goal of a rough mix at this stage in the mix is to be able to begin working with your other levels with your drums sort of, I don't want to say dialed in, but kind of like pre-dialed in. So that you can start messing with guitar and bass levels, vocal levels, because you don't really ever want to mix anything like it. There's no point in me mixing the drums completely in solo and then going, oh, they're good now. Like that's how they're going to be the rest of the mix, because I haven't listened to them compared to anything else. So you get a rough mix with the drums, you start mixing other elements, and you're going to go, whoa, that actually needs to change. That all really needs to change. Okay. So you'll make some little tweaks to the drums there, but at least you have this sort of starting point with the drums so that your ear is comfortable with them as you begin adding other elements like bass, guitar, vocals. All right, so that's essentially why we do a rough mix. Keep sniffing. I'm sorry about that. I really should have put that explanation that I just finished at the beginning. That would have made sense, right? Note to self. Put a good explanation of why we do a rough mix at the beginning of the tutorial. All right, so as I said, you can use these recordings to give yourself a stereo image. So let's experiment with it a little bit. I'm gonna send the room mics far right, and I'm gonna send the hi-hat and tom mics far left. The problem with this is that The hi-hat, now I'm just kind of taking the hi-hat and spreading it all over the entire image. Not great, not ideal. I don't really care. It's just to give the drum some depth. This is not a professional recording. I'm such a beginner. We're all beginners. And, my drummer likes to play on the hi-hats a lot. He likes to do fancy patterns and stuff. So it's fine if there's hi-hat sound in it, And I could do some things where I send stuff left and EQ and do it right, but I'm not going to bother. Let's listen to what it sounds like with me just doing that. Again, I sent the room mic, both of them, far right, and the hi-hat tom combined mic channels far left. Here, this is what it sounds like. I'll solo this for you so you can hear. I'm not sure how this works out on your phone or at home on your laptop. I'm going to set these back to 0. Oh yeah, see? Once it's once you start shifting, I hope that at home that's doing something for you. I apologize if it's not. If you're listening on a decent laptop, you will have 2 little different speakers. A lot of newer cell phones now even have 2 speakers, believe it or not. I looked up my phone, I have the Note 5, and it actually produces stereo. I was surprised. I thought cell phone for sure would be a mono speaker. If you're listening in your car, which is kind of weird, but maybe you have that YouTube Red, or you're just watching a video while you're driving, hey, good for you. You should have heard that bouncing back in. And then the advice I was told was, and this is advice from a person I know personally, not from a YouTube video or a book. And his thing was, don't ever go 100% right and left. Go more in the 90 or 80 range. He says, depending on what the element is, if he wants something to sit far in the mix, he'll never go beyond 90. I don't know why. That's just his thing. But, did I have these? No, that was okay. I thought maybe I had them backwards. So I'm going to set these all to 90. I did the 100% for you to get an idea of what it sounds like. And I'm just going to set it to 90 now because that's kind of it's a thing that I heard from someone else that I've picked up. And it does seem to just keep a little more of the tightness of the sound. That's all I can really tell you is setting them all the way far and right does give you this exaggerated size. Again, we're talking in terms of, we're using physical descriptions to talk about things that are sound based. So it's kind of tough, but you have to have some sort of framework of euphemism to talk about the sound, because we're not actually, most of us have never studied sound engineering to the level where we know the technical terms. So, not sending them 100%, just keeping them at 90, or guitars. Now I've been more experimenting with the 75% and lower for width, 75 to 65%. I wouldn't go any less than 65. And that's something I'll go into later with guitars, because when I send the guitars far right and left early on, there was a problem there, and they were fighting. It was fighting with the cymbals. That's something we'll go into later. That's another good mix topic. But so I believe I'm pretty sure I'm right where I want to be. Let's listen to it one more time. Let's make sure that this 20, now that we've made these changes, let's make sure this 20% or this negative 20 dB, we've cut the volume on the ambient bus by quite a bit, just so that the cymbal sound comes out of the whole drum mix. So let's listen to drum. That sounds pleasing to my ear. I'm fine with it. The compression, you can... The one place you can hear the compression right here is the cymbals. You can kind of hear when the compressor lets up a little bit. It makes a little bit of a shushing sound. Let's hear that. Now that's okay. That's okay. because, again, you're never going to hear these drums. The final product, you're never going to hear these drums solo. You're never going to hear them in a vacuum. You're always going to hear it with bass guitar and vocals. Well, in that particular section, there's no vocals, but you're never going to hear those cymbals by themselves. You're going to have elements coming in and out. And because they're going rhythmically, that shushing, or sometimes you might refer to it as pumping, which I don't know if higher end elements actually get pumping. I know pumping has to do with bass waves and kick and stuff. Sometimes that's a desirable effect. That shushing might actually add, when we have the guitar chugging along and the bass, I'm not slapping right there, but that sound you hear from the compressor might blend into the mix beautifully. So, like I said, I believe we're right where we want to be for this mix. My next step, we'll just get a little preview of the next video, or to, end this. Where would you go from here? Well, I'd start listening with the bass. Here we go. Right away I can tell I've got too much bass. And that might be because that ambient bus is cut so hard that it's not... The bass is overpowering. I can dial the bass back. I can turn the ambient bus up. Try a couple of different things. So anyway, again, this was episode 4 of Mix with a Newb. The topic was a rough mix and what that means and why we use one. And the plugin we covered was compression. And like I said, I just briefly touched on compression because it's this sort of really broad category that you could go your whole career, your whole life, and not really fully understand compression. That's the way I feel anyway. And I've heard other people on YouTube and things say, yeah, compression can be bad. And then we also talked about nudging. And we talked about if you're recording and you have a microphone set back from the drums, shifting things so that your waves are lining up. And I believe that was really it. So thank you for watching. If you haven't yet, please click subscribe. That would be great. Leave me a thumbs up. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching.